language, at least a letter to the head of the National Park Service suggesting that this is an area that the Congress itself, in a bipartisan way, thinks that ought to be explored. So if the gentleman would like me to yield to him, unless he'd like to claim his own time.
The gentleman would yield. I would say that I think the gentleman has stated the case as it is, that it is an earmark, and that's a whole other story we could talk about. But I agree with what the gentlelady is trying to do here, and I will tell you that both the ranking member and I will work with the gentlelady from the District of Columbia to try to resolve this in conference so that we can do what you're trying to accomplish here, because I think it is important.
The gentlelady's smiling, so I would accept that in her concurrence. We'll move forward in that fashion if the gentlelady would mind withdrawing her amendment. Very good.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia rise?
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the remarks of the chairman and the ranking member, and in light of those remarks and their generosity, I do withdraw my amendment and will work with them to try to implement it in other ways.
The gentlewoman withdraws her amendment.
I ask unanimous consent that it be withdrawn.
The amendment is withdrawn. The clerk will read.
Page 14, line 20, Historic Preservation Fund, $49,500,000. Construction, $152,121,000.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Carter of Texas. Page 15, line 8, after the dollar amount, insert decreased by $1 million, increased by $1 million.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is an amendment that is put together to ensure that the Interior Department prioritize its efforts to construct a joint law enforcement center in national parks and recreation areas along the southern border of the United States with available funds. National park lands on our southern border have experienced a gigantic increase in the amount of illegal activity that has crossed into our park lands. The reason for this is very similar to grabbing a beanbag and squeezing it. It always bulges out at some point, and as we start tighten our southern border with a lot of the efforts that have been bipartisan efforts by this Congress, it causes the people who are wanting to have illegal activity move farther and farther out into the rural areas and into the unoccupied areas, and they are moving into our national parks. The joint law enforcement centers will serve or be available to serve the National Park Service law enforcement agencies, the United States Customs and Border Patrol, possibly even the Coast Guard when they're on the river at that border, any other federal, state, or local and law enforcement agencies as may be needed. This is something that has been discussed, has been agreed upon, and been approved. Additional rangers and border patrolmen have been added to our border and been assigned and being compensated for working down there, but they lack serious facilities within which to be able to operate. One example that when we sent a group down to take a look at what other needs might be on our southern border, we ran across 8 border patrolmen that were working in a temporary facility that was 288 square feet. This is absolutely inadequate, and if they were working in conjunction with the Park Service, there was no place for the Park Service to even stand in the building. The purpose of this amendment is to jumpstart by dedicating $1 million to the National Park Service from the National Park Service Construction Fund for FY 2012 to jumpstart the interagency project already agreed upon between the Departments of Interior and Homeland Security. We are confident with this shot in the arm we will be able to get these centers, as they may be available, constructed. And it's not just a place for these folks to work, but you know, if you'll take a look at most of our southern border, from all the way across, you'll see that when it comes time that there's no place to hold prisoners when they're captured doing illegal activity, then you have to transport them. And in many instances, this transportation is 150 miles to a place where they can be secured. And these would also allow at least for temporary detention so that we wouldn't have Border Patrolmen running back and forth 150 miles every time there's a detention needed. This is a facility that really will aid what we've already provided, which is personnel to help defend our southern border. It is budget neutral, and I would respectfully request that this be adopted.
Would the gentleman yield?
I certainly will.
We are prepared on this side to accept the gentleman's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The purpose is the gentleman from Virginia rise.
Well, I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm not necessarily rising to oppose this, but to point out some deficiencies in the amendment itself. The claim is that the purpose of the amendment is to ensure that the National Park Service prioritizes construction of law enforcement centers on national park lands on the southern border in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security. First of all, there is some feeling that national parks ought not have basically prison sites on them, because what happens is that when people are rounded up by the Border Patrol, they are taken to these law enforcement centers and detained until they, I don't know whether they're adjudicated or not, but eventually then they're moved to another place. But they would be at least temporarily detained at these law enforcement centers. And there is some feeling that national parks are not an appropriate location for that purpose. But the very wording of the amendment doesn't really do that. It increases money, then it decreases the same amount of money. If it did it, it would be an earmark. And, of course, we don't do earmarks in this bill. So, as I say, I don't rise in opposition because I'm not sure what the amendment does, but I do think it's helpful to be informed as to what it doesn't do. And I'll yield back my time. Well, I'd be happy to yield, sure.
Thank you very much. It's my understanding that this joint agreement, as we saw the acceleration of park rangers, and you're right, quite honestly, I don't think anywhere on the southern border people want illegal activity to be going on in our recreation areas wherever they may be located. And nobody is trying to warehouse prisoners in a national park. It's hard to envision this facility, but it would be a facility, so I would assume, sort of like some of the facilities you see in other locations where people are operating out of it, but they have a temporary detention holding cell. This would be strictly, and maybe I can explain by pointing out one of the problems we have on the border with the transportation of our prisoners. And in fact, one of the things we used our National Guard for when we did have to transport prisoners when they were working on the border, that always has to be someone having this prisoner in custody. For whatever the accused crime is, they have to be in custody. And when we had limited resources, we buffed them up. But when they take a trained Border Patrolman whose duty is to protect our border, if he's the only one available and he has to transport that prisoner because there's no facility to temporarily hold him in, when I say temporary, it could be hours or maybe even minutes until something can come along to help transport. If he's alone and he's operating, then he has to transport him 150 miles. That's 3 hours. That officer is off of his post to make the transport. So it's kind of, that's a little tiny part of the purpose of this facility. The facility is really for a working space for those resources that we've already beefed up and put down on the border. And both Interior and Homeland have made agreements, and really it's kind of a kick to just get them started.
Well, I understand.
And I believe we'll see funding come from both sources to finish the project.
I'll reclaim my time. I understand the gentleman wants to make that point. I understand the challenges that are faced in the area that he represents. I know that. Well, I was similarly confused though when there was a substantial amendment to strip funding for environmental mitigation between the Homeland Security and Interior Departments. Previously that the gentleman suggested and I think was successful in doing. So I don't know. It's not an area that I'm particularly familiar with. I'm becoming more familiar with it. But again, I'm not sure this amendment accomplishes anything but drawing attention to the issue. And I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
The clerk will continue the reading.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida
I have an
rise?
amendment at the desk, Micah 1.
The clerk will.
Is he going to do number 1? I was told that this one was going to take the place of the other two. He has number 1 and number 2. We were told.
Make sure he has it.
Can the gentleman submit his amendment to the desk?
Yes, we did.
The clerk will read.
Page 14, line 20. Historic Preservation Fund, $49,500,000. Construction, $152,121,000. Land and Water Conservation Fund.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
An amendment at...
We don't have a copy of the gentleman's amendment. It is usually the protocol to give one to the...
We were trying to sneak this one in.
How are you doing on the FAA bill, by the way?
That's why I'm here tonight.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Micah of Florida, page 15, line 8, after the dollar amount insert increased by $2 million. Page 65, line 19, after the dollar amount insert decreased by $2 million.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for, again, the clerk and all for reading this amendment. I'm sorry that the minority did not have a copy of this fine amendment. It was modified slightly from the original submission to comply with the requirements of the parliamentarian to be in order. Let me say at this late hour, I won't take too much time. I'm from the authorizing side, and it's always good to come here and hear the difficulties that the appropriators have in trying to make choices. And tonight is about making choices, and I do have to compliment Mr. Simpson, the chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Hastings, the chair of the full committee, the ranking members, Mr. Moran and Mr. Dix, for their efforts being up late at night, making these difficult choices in some very tough economic times. And normally I wouldn't come here and tell you what to do, but again, coming from a state that has some 11 parks and preserves and national monuments, I have a great interest in some of these accounts. Now, we all have to set priorities, and as I said, these are difficult times. The Department of Interior, I noticed, has had, I guess in 2010, just under $11 billion. It's being cut to $9.8 billion, a 7% reduction. People ask me about transportation projects, whether it's FAA, transportation. I'm reducing some of the accounts by 30% in authorization, so I know the difficulty you're facing. Now, I also looked at some of the other accounts here. EPA, I think folks would be shocked to find EPA has $7.1 billion in this bill, quite a bit to operate that agency, while the National Park Service has $2.5 billion. I think if you ask people on the street, where would you put the dollars, I think they'd like to see something very tangible. They appreciate their national parks, and again, you have difficult priorities. My amendment is simple. It takes $2 million out of EPA's account for management programs, and it transfers it to the National Parks construction account. Now, this is not going to resolve a $10 billion backlog in maintenance and construction projects, but I could give you examples. Just a few miles from here, Harper's Ferry, they have a $59 million deferred maintenance account pending. Florida, with its 11 parks and preserves and national monuments, has a $4 million backlog. And again, my amendment won't solve even Florida's problem. Even closer to home in my district, and I want to thank again the chairman of the committee and chairman of the subcommittee and staff for working with me. We are attempting, after authorization in 2004, to finally finish a visitor center. I want to make certain that the Castillo San Marcos Visitor Center and the backlog of some of the Florida's 11 parks and national monuments, their maintenance and some of their construction costs, that we have those funds available. So that's why I offered this amendment. Again, I know you have difficult choices. This won't resolve the pending needs either in the state of Florida or nationally. That being said, and also stating my position and intent, and knowing that the committee, and I know Mr. Simpson is anxious to work with me and is committed to work with me, Mr. Hastings and staff, and in the interest of time and also not pressing the issue beyond my ability to retain my friendship and strong working relationship, I'm going to ask unanimous consent at this hour to withdraw my amendment.
Without objection, the amendment has been withdrawn.
Thank you.
The clerk will read.
Page 15, line 9. Land and Water Conservation Fund. The contract authority provided for fiscal year 2012 by 16 U.S.C. 4601-10A is hereby rescinded. Land acquisition and state assistance, $18,294,000. Administrative provisions. In addition, franchise fees credited to a sub-account shall be available for expenditure by the Secretary. National Park Service funds may be transferred to the Federal Highway Administration. United States Geological Survey. Surveys, investigations, and research, $1,053,552,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013. Administrative provisions. The amount appropriated shall be available for reimbursement to the General Services Administration for Security Guard Services. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation and Enforcement, Ocean Energy Management, $138,605,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013. For an additional amount, $10 million to remain available until expended. Oil spill research, $14,923,000. Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement, Regulation and Technology, $123,050,000. Abandoned Mine Reclamation Fund, $27,443,000. Administrative provision, With funds in this act, the Secretary may transfer title for computer hardware to state and tribal regulatory and reclamation programs. Bureau of Indian Affairs and Bureau of Indian Education, operation of Indian programs, $2,333,690,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013. Construction, $154,992,000. Indian land and water claim settlements and miscellaneous payments to Indians, $32,855,000. Indian Guaranteed Loan Program account, $8,114,000. Administrative provisions. The Bureau may carry out programs by direct expenditure.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, and I move to strike the last word. Strike the last word, please.
Does the gentleman seek to offer an amendment or strike the last word?
Strike the last word and talk about my amendment.
We're not quite to the member's amendment. The clerk will continue to read.
Administrative provisions. The Bureau may carry out programs by direct expenditure. The Bureau may contract for services in support of the management of the Power Division of the San Carlos Irrigation Project. Appropriations for the Bureau shall be available for expenses of exhibits. No funds available to the Bureau shall be available for contracts. In the event any tribe returns appropriations to the Bureau, this action shall not diminish the federal government's trust responsibility to that tribe, other than amounts provided under 25 U.S.C. 452.
Oh, okay. That's all right. I withdraw. Excuse me.
The clerk will continue to read.
Shall be available to support any elementary or secondary school in the state of Alaska. Appropriations for schools funded by the Bureau shall be available only to the schools in the Bureau school system as of September 1st, 1996.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, Madam Chair.
The clerk will report the amendment.
We want to reserve a point of order.
Or is he going to do this one?
The gentleman's point of order is reserved. The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Gosar of Arizona. Page 31, lines 2 through 10. Strike funds made available and all that follows through that period, and insert a charter school as that term is defined in Section 1141 of the Education Amendments of 1978, 25 U.S.C. 2021, may operate.
The gentleman from
We'd like to make a point of order. We don't have a copy of the gentleman's amendment.
The clerk will distribute copies, and the point of order is reserved. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I rise in support of my amendment. As currently written, the Department of Interior Appropriations Bill states that education funds made available under this Act may not be used to establish a charter school at a Bureau-funded school. My amendment would allow money appropriated under this bill to be used for charter schools. Now, the bill grandfathers in charter schools funded prior to 1999, but bars no new charter schools. The committee report is silent on this. As of the 2005 census, children made up 1.4 million of the total American Indian and Alaska Native populations. They and their parents deserve educational choices. Charter schools are semi-independent schools, usually within a state's public education system, that are designed and operated by educators, parents, community leaders, educational, entrepreneurials, and others. As of 2006, a total of 40 states in the District of Columbia have passed charter school laws allowing this type of school to be part of their system. I see no reason to deny this opportunity to American Indians. I believe administrators of such schools may worry about administrative issues in terms of accounting for students who transfer between a charter school and a non-charter school and the monies that are appropriated. This is sometimes referred as the ownership of the student. But such administrative concerns should not be a basis to completely ban this option. Competent administrators at the BIA, the tribes, and the state educational associations can work out the transitional issues. Further, to the extent someone does not like charter schools, so be it. Don't send your child to one. But we in Congress should be not picking winners and losers. Charter schools should be an available choice to those tribes that want them. If a tribe chooses not to offer a charter school approach, that is its decision, but another tribe may do so on its own. There is no reason in this appropriation bill to foreclose this option. We should not impose our personal likes and dislikes on others. It is my further belief that allowing the tribes the maximum ability to choose the best educational program is consistent with self-determination. Having the right to decide local school decisions is a part of self-determination, and I don't see why we in Congress would deny that right. A key part of self-determination is choosing the manner in which the tribes educate their children. As far back as 1970, President Nixon addressed this issue that was then emerging and stated, "It is long past time that the Indian policies of the federal government began to recognize and build upon the capacities and insights of the Indian people. Both as a matter of justice and as a matter of enlightened social policy, we must begin to act on the basis of what the Indians themselves have long been telling us. The time has come to break decisively with the past and to create the conditions for a new era in which the Indian future is determined by Indian acts and Indian decisions." Indeed, that is what Congress did when it passed the Indian Self-Determination and Educational Assistance Act of 1975. Allowing the tribes to choose a charter school option makes sense from a self-determination perspective. Finally, according to the Center for Educational Reform, there are over 5,000 charter schools nationwide. There are examples of charter schools with spectacular successes and results. I'm sure there are some charter schools that have failed in their mission. The point here, however, is about choice and allowing the tribes to decide what educational opportunities they want to create. It is well known that charter schools are schools of choice. Unlike traditional public schools, students may choose to attend charter schools, and if those students determine that the schools are not serving their needs, they may choose to leave. It is true that many charter schools typically have longer school days, longer school years, and higher academic and behavioral expectations for their students. For those concerned about the current public educational system, these trends should be encouraged. But let's allow the tribes to make that choice. It is Congress's duty to describe and allow such choices as part of its oversight and application of our treaties with the American Indian tribal relations and how they are governed. I ask for the support of this amendment and support for Indian self-determination and school choice. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho rise?
Strike last word.
The gentleman is recognized for...
Madam Chairman, we don't have any problem with this amendment. This is kind of new territory in our bill, but I appreciate the gentleman from Arizona's work on this and his interest in providing quality education for our Native American brothers and sisters all across this country. It's a deep concern that I share also, and I look forward to working with him to make sure that this does what's intended to provide what's necessary for our Indian population so that they have the advantages that all of us have. Thank the gentleman for offering the amendment.
Yields back. The gentleman from Washington wished to continue to reserve his point of order.
I withdraw my point of order, but I'd like to ask a question to the gentleman from Arizona.
The gentleman withdraws, and the gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I move to strike the requisite number of words. Funds, in your amendment, it says funds made available and all that follows through that period, but, and insert a charter school as that term is defined in Section 1141 of the Education Amendments of 1978. Could you tell us what that definition is, please?
We were looking that up, my colleague from Washington. We don't have that on the laptop as this point of inquiry.
So you have no idea what this amendment means?
It allows the option for choice of charter schools as defined as charter schools.
Well, how do you know that if you haven't read, if you don't know what the amendment is? I mean, if you don't know what the language is.
Well, they were grandfathered in up to 1999, but no provisions were given for that detail past 1999.
I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Washington yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The clerk will read.
Page 31, line 23. The Secretary shall continue to distribute indirect cost funds to such grantee using the Section 5F distribution formula. Departmental offices, Office of the Secretary, Departmental Operations, $250,151,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Dold of Illinois. Page 32, line 12, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $24,700,000. Page 65, line 19, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $24,700,000. Page 65, line 21, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $24,700,000.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I thank you. I rise today to restore funding to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This important initiative received steep cuts in this year's interior bill. My amendment would simply restore half of the funding that was cut. This amendment is part of a two-step process to restore funding to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This amendment transfers funds from the departmental offices account to the environmental programs and management and would be accompanied by a subsequent amendment to specify increase this funding to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I do appreciate the support that the Appropriations Committee has shown the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative in the past, and I'm thankful that it does remain a priority within the geographic programs account. However, I do believe it is vitally important to restore some funding so that we can continue to protect the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are truly a shared national treasure. As the largest group of freshwater lakes on Earth, they hold 95% of the United States' surface freshwater and are a source of clean drinking water to over 30 million people. From the beautiful beaches, wide open waters, to the bluffs and dunes, the Great Lakes provide a wide array of recreational opportunities and are an important part of the physical landscape and cultural heritage of North America. Furthermore, the Great Lakes provide transportation for raw materials and finished goods, all of which create jobs and contributes to a stronger economy. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is an important part of restoring the health and vitality of our Great Lakes. Certainly in my district, the 10th District of Illinois, we want to make sure that the Great Lakes are taken care of and protected for future generations. However, the ecosystem is showing signs of serious stress, and action is now required to restore, rehabilitate, and make our Great Lakes better. As a Scoutmaster, I teach the Boy Scouts the principles of leaving areas better than when we found it. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is an important avenue in which to clean up our lakes and restore them to their natural beauty so that they can remain the crown jewel for generations to come. But in order to preserve our Great Lakes, we need the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to help tackle the challenges facing this natural treasure. First, toxic substances are polluting the water, and this initiative helps with cleanup and the pollution prevention. Also, invasive species are causing severe ecological stress on the lakes, and the initiative institutes a zero-tolerance policy so that species such as the Asian carp cannot become fully established in the Great Lakes. Third, we must ensure that the pollution does not impair water quality. And finally, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative works to restore degraded wetlands and wildlife habitats. Earlier this year, I, along with Congressman Lipinski, introduced the Great Lakes Water Protection Act, which would protect Lake Michigan and the rest of the Great Lakes from wastewater discharges by prohibiting publicly owned treatment works from intentionally diverting wastewater systems to bypass any portion of the treatment facility. This is just one more step my colleagues and I in the Great Lakes region are taking to fight for the protection of our lakes. And yet, despite all of these concerns, the current recommendation for this critical initiative is just over half of what it received in fiscal year 2010 and $49.4 million below the fiscal year 2011 enacted level. Now, I do appreciate the hard work that the Appropriations Committee has been tasked with, and I fully support the committee's efforts to be fiscally responsible, to rein in federal spending, and to make sure that we are funding our nation's priorities. That is why my amendment only seeks to restore half of the roughly $50 million cut that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative received in this year's Interior bill. But I do believe that the Great Lakes are at risk, and we must restore funding so that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative can work to protect our natural resources for our children, our grandchildren, and for decades to come. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho rise?
Move to strike last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairman, and I thank the gentleman for offering his amendment. We had to make some tough decisions in this bill. Some of them were with the money that we spent in the geographical programs. I believe every geographical program had reduced funding in this bill. Last year they were funded at $300 million. I think the President requested $350 million for the Great Lakes Geographical Program. We funded it at $250 million. And while I appreciate what the gentleman is trying to do with his amendment, and I thank him for offering it, the fact is we just don't have that kind of money. And the offset of this is $24 million out of the Secretary's account, which we earlier took $20 million out of it. I don't believe the Secretary is sleeping very well tonight. Pretty soon he won't have any money left in his office, as a matter of fact. So that is a problem. It's not what the gentleman is trying to do. Fully support what the gentleman is trying to do. It's the offset and trying to get $20 million out of the Secretary's account, which causes the problem for me. And I would hope that my colleagues would reject this amendment as we work on trying to make sure that we, in conference, can do what's necessary to fund those programs that do protect the Great Lakes, the Puget Sound, Chesapeake Bay, Long Island Sound, San Francisco Bay, some of the other great water bodies in this country. So appreciate the gentleman's amendment, but I have to rise in opposition to it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
I'd like to request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
Madam Chairwoman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 44, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Reed of New York.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I rise today and offer an amendment with my colleague from Oklahoma, Mr. Bourne. This is a bipartisan amendment to this appropriations bill with the intent to return funding from to the Forest Health Management account under state and private forestry. What we're intending to do with our proposed amendment is to move money from the D.C. bureaucracy, and I anticipate there will be a concern raised about the offset of the line that we're using to cover this increase in the Forest Health Management account from the Secretary's account. But I firmly do believe that our taxpayer dollars are better spent not on the bureaucracy of the Secretary's office here in Washington, D.C., but more importantly on the front lines and into the states that can benefit from these programs. This program that we're trying to take care of with this amendment is to restore the funding for the purposes of weeding out invasive species which threaten many industries and our environment across the nation. Essentially, invasive species threaten natural habitats, economies, and environments in every state and essentially every district that we represent. The work done by the Forest Service in education, outreach, and on-the-ground action is imperative to the prevention and early detection of non-native invasive species. By way of just one example that we deal with in our district, in the New York 29th Congressional District, is the emerald ash borer beetle, which can kill an ash tree within 5 years, decimating forests across the states and across our district. This pest and other insects have caused disruption on local economies and on job producers nationwide. Research estimates that we have reviewed at our office indicate that replacement and treatment of affected ash trees could total $10 billion over the next decade should this pest continue to spread. This is just one pest of many that the U.S. Forest Service is working to maintain and to address so that federal and state funds are not diverted from other meaningful initiatives. Working with individual states on invasive species control, the forest health management programs are part of a collaborative effort to protect forests and grasslands where their efforts can be most effective, in the field, on the front line, rather than here behind a desk in Washington, D.C. The benefit of placing federal funds into action on the front lines, therefore, far outweighs the use of those funds to bloat the federal bureaucracy. And therefore, I ask my colleagues to support this amendment and join in this bipartisan effort with all due respect to the chairman of the appropriations process that is making some very difficult decisions in this day and age. But I just want to highlight this issue, and I truly do believe that through a bipartisan effort we can get money from D.C. into the fields and deal with the issue of invasive species that threatens economies and industry across the nation. With that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Madam Chairwoman.
This is the gentleman from Idaho.
Move to strike last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the gentleman from New York's observation that we are working with some very difficult numbers. And he's absolutely right. And this is an account, frankly, that I think is important. The invasive species and trying to control invasive species across this country is of high importance. It's of high importance in Idaho as it is in New York and other places across the country. But as the gentleman noted, the concern is the offset. While we actually treated this account better than most other accounts within this budget, we actually only reduced it by 2.5%. Some other accounts, EPA's accounts, down 18%, and some other things. Most accounts receive substantially less funding. And where you're taking this money from, as I said on the last amendment, the Office of the Secretary is funded in this bill $33.5 million below the budget's request. That was before we took out another $20 million in an earlier amendment to put it into the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So now we're down $53.5 million. We add this to it, and we're going to be down $61.5 or $62 million. Sometimes these, what appear to be small amounts, add up. If we're going to have a Secretary's office that actually functions, we have to keep enough resources there so that he can do his job. And while I appreciate what the gentleman is trying to do, sympathize with what he's trying to do, and support the effort of what he's trying to do, the fact that the offset, I think, affects an account that we have substantially reduced already is a problem, so I would oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Idaho yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose, the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairwoman, I rise to agree with the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee, just as I did with the last amendment. The idea of a bloated bureaucracy when you've taken $53 million out of the Secretary's office, it seems to me is misplaced. We're talking about giving the Office of the Secretary of the Interior far more responsibility, and now at every opportunity we seem to be cutting the resources that are necessary to fulfill those responsibilities. Already tonight we've taken $20 million from the Office of the Secretary's account. So just as I did with the prior amendment, I would also agree with the chairman's comments and associate myself with them, so I won't take any more of the body's time. Thank you. I yield my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair,
for what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
To request a recorded vote on the amendment.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana. Page 32, line 12. After the dollar amount, insert decreased by $420,000. Page 158, line 25. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $420,000.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment that I bring would take $420,000 from the Secretary of Interior's account and move it into the spending reduction account to reduce the nation's deficit. And the reason that we're doing this is that over the last year, since the Deepwater Horizon exploded, the administration came out with a policy not long after that imposed a moratorium on drilling, a moratorium that was found by federal courts to be outside of the law. The administration, unfortunately, went forward with that moratorium, costing thousands of American jobs, hurting America's energy security. But even after the lifting of the moratorium, they still to this day maintain what we call a permitorium, a refusal to issue permits to explore in the Gulf of Mexico for American energy. Not only has it cost our nation tens of thousands of jobs, but it's also cost us energy security where now we're even more dependent on Middle Eastern countries for oil. It's led to higher prices of gasoline at the pumps. It's had devastating impacts, and yet there's been no accountability to the administration for their policies that have led to this destruction of our economic well-being and our energy security as it relates to American energy, and especially as it relates to jobs in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, if you really want to get down to the details of this amendment, one of the things we've said for a long time is a lot of these companies, these big employers that have been out there for a long time exploring safely for American energy, they want to continue to be able to explore for American energy, and they want to go back to work, but they haven't been allowed to because of administration policies. But what's more absurd is that while the administration has had this permitorium where they won't let people go back to work, they have also allowed the clock to continue ticking on the permits and on the leases. And you've got a finite amount of time for a lease. You've got a 10-year period of time. And if the administration is saying you can't properly develop your lease, that'd be one thing if they said we're going to stop the clock while we as an administration go forward with this radical policy that all outside experts have said has nothing to do with safety and is hurting not only American energy production, but American jobs. But what the administration said is they're going to continue to let the clock run. It's like if you're playing a basketball game and then the referee's holding the ball and the clock's still running. You're sitting there saying, look, I just want the ball. I want to be able to go out and play by the rules, and the referee's holding the ball while the clock continues to run. That's just not fair. And yet the administration continues to do this. This House, Madam Chair, passed legislation, H.R. 1229. It's called the Putting the Gulf of Mexico Back to Work Act. This legislation that we passed here in this House with a bipartisan vote sent over to the Senate. They still haven't taken action in the Senate. But what this legislation did, amongst other things, is address that problem and said if this administration is going to tell responsible companies who are trying to go back to work, who are trying to do the right thing, if the administration is going to tell them that they're not allowed to play by their own rules, then the clock stops while the administration denies them the ability to be permitted. And so the legislation that we passed addressed this, but the Senate, for whatever reason, refuses to take that up. Again, costing our country thousands of good, high-paying jobs and hurting America's energy security, making us more dependent on Middle Eastern oil. And so what we're saying with this amendment is, if this administration wants to continue going forward with that radical policy, which a majority of the President's own hand-picked scientists in his report right after the explosion of the Horizon said is irresponsible to do, would actually reduce safety by denying permits, by having this moratorium and now permitorium, then there has to be accountability. We have to hold this administration accountable for their actions. And the $420,000 number in this bill that we're setting aside and putting into the deficit reduction account was gathered by looking at the number of leases that expire at the end of this year. 350 leases will expire at the end of this year, not through any fault of those companies that are out there trying to explore for American energy, but because the administration won't let them play by the rules. And so if they're going to be irresponsible with their policies, there has to be a price to pay. There has to be accountability that the American people say, you're not going to use taxpayer money to deny American jobs, to deny American energy, and make our country more dependent on Middle Eastern oil, and make our country continue to have to pay this higher price at the pump. It's their policies that have done it. And it's clear and everybody understands that. People in the Gulf of Mexico recognize that. But there has been no accountability by this Congress. And so that's what this legislation is intended to do. This amendment will address that problem, and I urge adoption.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment reluctantly. I understand what the gentleman is saying. I agree with what he's saying. There's a concern there, I think, that members have, that we are not allowing these oil companies to go out after the permits, and we're trying to send a message to the Secretary. I understand that, and I don't have a problem with sending a message. The problem is, and this is a little bit of inside baseball, I guess, to talk about it this way. The problem is, under the rules we have, if you can reduce an account by a certain amount and put that money in the budget reserve account, which then reduces the allocation that the committee has to spend. He takes the $420,000, I think it is, out of the Office of the Secretary and reduces our allocation by that much. And as members have heard that have listened to this debate, there are both Republicans and Democrats that are concerned about some of the funding allocations in this bill of the various accounts. People want to put more money into the Land and Water Conservation Fund. People want to put more money in, as the last amendment did, into the invasive species program, taking care of invasive species. You go throughout, there are members on both sides of the aisle that believe that various accounts are funded at too low of a level. So to take this money and put it into the budget reserve account and take it out of the interior appropriation bills means that's money that is not available under that could go into another account. Now, this bill comes to the floor under the budget resolution that was passed by the House under the 302A and the 302B cap, the allocation that was given to this committee. It's a tough allocation, but we've made those tough decisions, and I don't like to see money to send a message to the Secretary, money taken out of his account and put into the budget reserve account when there are other accounts within the appropriation that could obviously use the funds. So if you weren't putting it into the budget reserve account, I don't have a problem with the message you're trying to send. So I appreciate what the gentleman is trying to do, but I would reluctantly have to oppose the amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I rise to strike the last word, Madam Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I agree with the chairman of the committee again that this amendment should be opposed. But I would also mention that I don't know how fast the administration could issue drilling permits in the Gulf of Mexico that would be fast enough. It's as though Deepwater Horizon never happened. When it did happen, people died. The ecology of the Gulf area was severely and adversely affected. The economy was devastated. And we did a complete investigation and found that it was largely because the Minerals Management Service was not doing its job, that they were issuing permits too quickly without adequate review. Sometimes they were just letting permit forms be filled out by the oil companies themselves. Sometimes they had already made arrangements to go to work for the oil companies. But for whatever reason, the fact is that they weren't doing their job. They were letting down the American public. They were letting down the workers on the drilling rigs, and they certainly contributed to a despoiling of the environment, the ecology of the Gulf. And so this Congress, both sides having been severely critical of the Minerals Management Service, reorganized it and instructed it to be very careful at least much more careful than they had been in the past in terms of issuing drilling permits. That's what they're doing. Now, there have been any number of drilling permits issued. They're being issued so fast we don't have an exact number right now, but we know a lot have been issued. Again, I doubt that whatever the number was, that it would be enough for members that represent areas in the Gulf that benefit from more drilling activity. But the American public, this is a democracy, the majority of the American public, whatever state they're in, want the Secretary of the Interior to have a process that reflects integrity, that reflects caution, that puts the safety of workers and the protection of the environment first. So the Secretary is doing his job. We support the job he's doing. We know he's issuing a lot of permits, and we know that and agree with the chairman that this amendment should be defeated. I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose?
I have like to make a motion. If I can make a unanimous consent motion to strike lines 3 and 4 of this amendment, I would ask unanimous consent to do that.
Object with regard to that unanimous consent until we know what it is that he's trying to do.
Would the gentleman submit his modification to the desk?
Be happy to, Madam Chair.
Well, strike the second instruction. That's what I was saying. So it's just a decrease. So do we withdraw our objection?
Well, Madam Chair, I'll withdraw my objection. I see what
the clerk will report the modification.
Modification to amendment offered by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana. Strike the second instruction.
Without objection, the amendment is modified. Is there any further debate on the amendment? What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Chairman, I rise to strike the last word since it's now a different amendment.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairwoman, this is a distinction without a difference. The money still goes away. The argument that was made by the chairman of the committee still stands, as far as I can see. And so even though the amendment may be worded a little differently, the reality is that the money is lost. And we don't see that this would be a constructive amendment anyway, so we would oppose it.
Would the gentleman yield?
I would yield, yeah. I'll yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What the amendment, as it's now revised, would do is it would still reduce the $420,000. It wouldn't go to the spending reduction account. It would stay within the department. And I think that addresses one of the concerns that the chairman had. But it would still make it clear that there's going to have to be accountability for those people who have played by the rules who are being penalized today, that there's got to be some accountability, and in this case there would be the ability for us to not only send a message, but a message attached to a spending reduction in the Secretary's department, that he can't just deny people the ability to go back to work who are playing by the rules. And I yield back to the gentleman.
Well, I'll reclaim my my time. I don't know this business about playing by the rules and punishing people who don't. It seems to me that the Interior Department is trying to play by the rules that the Congress instructed it to play by. But notwithstanding that, when you remove $420,000 from the bill, don't know where it goes, I think you lose it. So I don't think that this makes a difference. You say what you're saying is that you're not going to put the $420,000 into this reduction account. What's the term of it? the spending reduction account, that does away with the money, but now what you're doing is basically taking it out of the bill, letting it fly away to who knows where, but the reality is it no longer exists. So it's coming out of the bill, and we don't think that's a good idea. We agree with the chairman that this amendment should be defeated. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment as modified offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair?
The gentleman from